Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. Round 9 of the Candidates Tournament saw the battle between the top two players. Jan Nepomniachtchi led the tournament and he had a point advantage over Fabiano Caruana. So Caruana had a chance to even things up if he could win this game. And he was playing with white. What's it going to be? Well, of course, a Petrov. This is the opening that both players have specialised in over the last couple of years. So what could Caruana come up with that would somehow get his opponent off guard? Well, so far in this game, everything normal. The trick when playing against a player who's obviously incredibly well prepared is to try and do something that maybe is obviously a little bit offbeat, but offbeat in the sense that computers haven't analysed it. So you don't go for your first choice. Don't go for the computer's first line the whole time. You try and find something that's a little bit quirky but still playable, basically. And this line, well, you might recall that one of the games from the World Championship lost autumn went knight c3 here. This was Carlsen Nepomniachtchi that went like this. And they reached an endgame very quickly with rook b1 and so on. And Carlsen had a little advantage, but basically Nepo managed to neutralise Carlsen's play. But instead of that, and here is the first move, which is, you could say, not the computer move. Of course, analysed with a computer by Caruana, but it's not the computer's first choice. That's what I mean. And it's a little bit unusual, attacking the bishop with the knight. So the knight goes offside, which does look a bit weird, because the bishop can simply step back. It is in a good position, but that knight, not so wonderfully placed. And now, well, you don't want to take this pawn. That looks pretty ugly for all kinds of reasons. I mean, just the fact that white's pieces look, well, very oddly placed. Black has the two bishops. It just doesn't look right at all. I imagine a move like b5 is just going to be fine for black. I would say black even has good chances to get the advantage there. But after bishop e6, queen c2 was the move, just increasing the pressure on this diagonal. Knight a6 threatens knight b4, therefore a3. And now f5. All these moves played quickly by Caruana. He was obviously still in his preparation, whereas Nepo was having to think things through quite carefully, because it is a very, very sharp position. But this f-pawn and the d-pawn holds the knight in position. But it does mean, whenever you advance an f-pawn, the squares behind it are a bit weaker. These squares are weaker, and the king opens up a little bit as well. And that could be significant. In fact, it was significant in the game. White develops knight c3, rook c8, and f3. So this is a big moment in the game. If black falls back, then, well, white will be doing pretty well. So if the knight comes back to f6, then in fact the f-pawn can be taken. Or if the knight exchanges here, this is what white wants, because you can see these squares on the e-file much, much weaker. And, this knight can be recycled via g2. Possibly in this position, even f4, and bringing the knight back to f3 and then into one of these squares. So that's really what white is looking to do. That would be very pleasant. But after f3, I mean, this is a very sharp position, and Nepo had to react very well here. He played bishop e7, good move, attacking the knight, which was defended with g3. And here, well, yeah, really sharp position. The computer's like bishop f6 here, you know, really sharp move, attacking this pawn. I mean, one idea is to take here, which at the first glance looks quite promising to break the pawns in front of the king, but actually the lack of this dark squared bishop would be quite pleasant for white. You know, that square could be occupied. In fact, the g file could be used very nicely by white in this position with the h pawn. So bishop f6 the computer likes. It's a really sharp position, but you know, if you're seeing this position for the first time and you know you're worried about your opponent's computer preparation, then you're going to be reluctant to play a really sharp move like that. Instead, Nepo fell back with knight d6, and now queen a4. Caruana goes for a queen exchange. And immediately you can see there's a threat to take here and take here. Bishop f6, a counterattack. Looking at that pawn. A queen exchange, so very forcing variation now. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d4 check. So the centre is cleared of pawns. And you've just got this mass of minor pieces. So it's a really unclear situation. Very hard to know what's going on. Now immediately you can see there's a threat to check and fork king and rook. So rook e8. And now bishop f4. And this looks quite pleasant for white. Caruana definitely has the initiative. Now how do you deal with that? You know, it's really not easy at all. If the knight drops back, then you know, rooks can be exchanged. You know, maybe f5 is vulnerable. There's also just the option maybe to bring a rook into the middle and to hit on these bishops. Black is under pressure. But Nepo found an incredible move. He didn't bother defending that knight. He played knight c5. And just to calculate the consequences of that move are, well, mind-boggling. They really are. When this one is on prise, you've got a counter-attack here. So, well, I mean, first things first, after bishop takes knight, knight takes bishop. In fact, black is okay here, because if bishop takes rook, then knight takes rook. And, yeah, black is hitting enough pieces. So Caruana, after knight c5, played knight e7 check. Now the king is forced to step up, which looks really risky. Again, Nepo had to calculate this very carefully. King h8, not a good move. Because after this, so that defends the bishop. And you can see, well, the rook is on the same line as the bishops. That one's attacked. In fact, this is good for white. So, you know, after the knight goes back, you can hit black with this check, take the rook, and now just the bishop drops back. And this is a problem. After bishop takes b2, you can't take this straight away because it's defended by the knight. However, you play bishop e3, attacking the knight, and then you're going to be able to take that one. So, you know, you can see the depth of calculation needed here is pretty extraordinary. But having seen that, Nepo would have realised that king f7 is basically forced. But now the king steps out into the open, and with all these pieces on the board, no queens, but all the other pieces on the board, this is quite scary. And actually it's here, oops, sorry, not that move. That was a mouse slip. It's here that Caruana decided to simplify the position. But he did have a chance to play this position on and to get something here. Or at least put pressure on Nepo. He could have played bishop f1, a simple move, just withdrawing the bishop from the knight's attack. Now, if rook takes, bishop takes knight. So material is even, but black is under a lot of pressure in this position. And there's potential for bishop c4 check to come at some moment. That pawn might be vulnerable. I mean, you can see that black's pieces are in a real jam here. So bishop f1, that's the interesting move. Instead of taking, it's possible just to move this knight. So let's say knight c8. And now a check on c4. This is really scary. The king's running out of squares. So if the king steps up, then there's going to be knight d5 check. So bishop e6, but now it's possible to sack an exchange. And take here. If knight takes e7, you take that one. You're going to recover material because of that pin. So the king steps up to f6. Knight d5 check is a nice move. If king takes knight, bishop d3 is mate. That's beautiful. And if king g6, knight takes here. So white is the exchange down. But these pieces are so well placed. Black's knight's not very good in this position. And white has a very pleasant initiative here. Let's just say enough for the material investment. I mean, at the moment it's bishop and pawn for a rook. But as I said, white's minor pieces are so well placed. It's definitely very decent compensation. But, calculating that out, not simple at all. And, well, it must have been some variation in there. I mean, that's a very superficial look at that. Something in there Caruana obviously didn't like. So he chose instead bishop takes pawn. Which also still looks very complicated. But this did allow Nepo to simplify. Exchange of pieces. Exchange of rooks. White is a pawn up at the moment. However, knight d3 is a strong move. Looking at all these points. And here, well, basically, white has to think about how to steer the game towards a draw. And, I mean, maybe a clean way to do this is to check. Play here. I mean, even this looks pretty bizarre. And rook here takes. And then just bring the rook back to e4. And knight takes b2. So material is now even. That should be a draw. But Caruana went for rook e4. I mean, he obviously thought that this was a pretty simple way to draw. But actually, black is now better. Because of this queenside passed pawn. And here, black's king is safe because that bishop covers these squares. Bishop f8 just protects the pawn. Everything is very safe here. The bishop covers those squares. Knight is knocked back. And here, Nepo could have played for a win with b5. Now, I'm not saying that this is a forced win at all. The computer thinks that basically white can hold this relatively easily. But, to my eyes, this is not simple. And it would have been, very difficult for Caruana to, have to hold this when, just a few moves before he was the one putting pressure on black. But for whatever reason, Nepo decided to play rook d8. But after this, in fact, Caruana was able to just blockade that b-pawn and hold the position. Everything is protected, and actually it's not possible for black to break that very easily. And here, well, Nepo simplifies. Well, he would like to get this endgame where the king could rush to disturb white's pieces, but king f3, of course, the king comes into play, and now white is completely safe, and Nepo forced to draw here by repeating the position. The white king has to keep hold of the rook. So a draw by threefold repetition. Well, an intriguing game, and for me that is such a good example of chess at the highest level. Deep preparation from Caruana in playing this move knight h4. Nepo responding pretty well in a very difficult situation. Yes, he could have done a bit better at this moment by playing bishop f6. But it did reach a position where you certainly can't talk about Caruana getting some kind of very clear advantage. He could have played on with this move bishop f1. But in the end, yeah, they simplified to this position, and basically black was absolutely fine. So that draw meant that Nepomniachtchi keeps his 1 point lead in the tournament. So after round 9, we have a score 6.5 for Nepo, Caruana 5.5, and then 2 players on 4.5, Nakamura and Ding on 4.5. Nakamura had a chance to gain ground, but lost against Rajabov. I have to say, Rajabov played an excellent game and outplayed Nakamura. So, yeah, Nepo 6.5, Caruana 5.5, Nakamura Ding on 4.5. So it's still looking like a 2-horse race. However, 5 rounds to go. Anything could happen. And Ding coming into the reckoning on 4.5 as he defeated Duda. I should mention that Firuz Jah defeated Rapport. So Firuz Jah manages to, salvage some pride at any rate. So, let me see. Yes, they play... No, tomorrow's a rest day. Tuesday a rest day. I just had to check my diary over there. Tuesday is a rest day. And they play round 10 on Wednesday. See you then.